so I'll call tonight's EDA meeting to order and find my words. Karen, could we have a roll call, please?
Commissioner Roberts? Here. Commissioner Husnick?
Here.
Commissioner Lorge? Commissioner Erickson?
Here.
And President Bain?
Here. And I'd like to invite everyone to rise and join us for the Pledge of Allegiance. Members of the EDA, we have an agenda before you this evening. I'll entertain a motion to approve or any changes.
I'll move the approval.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor signal by saying aye.
Aye.
Oppose, and our agenda is approved. Our next item this evening is minutes of our regular meeting from August 8th, 2022, and entertain a motion or any changes.
A motion to approve.
We have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor signal by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Oppose? And our minutes are approved. Our next item this evening is the Highway 61 Business Corridor Evaluation, and Abby is walking us through this.
Yeah, thank you. So the 2040 Comprehensive Plan has what's called a future land use map. And that future land use map helps guide the growth and development in any one pocket within the city. If Karen could bring up, share my screen here. The future land use map was included, I believe, in your packet, but it shows the different areas within the city where we will have conserved land, where we might have agricultural land in the future. What this kind of what we're looking at focusing on right now is the Highway 61 South Corridor. So in 2019, when we developed the plan, we were really guiding a whole lot of what is the headwaters area south along Highway 61 for mixed use. And that mixed use designation would allow for both residential and non-residential uses. The challenge that we're running into is we're finding that most of the developments in this area are, even though they're guided for mixed use, there's no prohibition on full residential development. So we're seeing a lot of interest in multifamily development through this area. So while that might be okay in the headwaters area, really to the south of that headwaters area, and I don't remember exactly, I think this is 180th, 190th, and there's like a 202 maybe in here. That area south, we're really looking at how can we promote non-residential uses through this area or encourage those in this area to help improve essentially the non-residential, the commercial climate, commercial industrial climate. I think it maybe have briefed the EDA on this. We've done some preliminary study and been able to find that changing this future land use classification would not affect our housing density requirements in any sort of a negative way. But one of the things as we're scoping out this project is this highway mixed use area leads right into what was called the highway business area. This highway business area was guided for this in anticipation of a new interchange or freeway off-ramp off of the I-35 corridor through there. And that's why the highway business was earmarked for that future land use. So we have two pockets really of non-residential use in that southwest corner that we need to reevaluate or look at of how can we promote these non-residential uses in these areas. There's factors to consider our transportation systems. As many of you know, down in that southwest corner, we're working with county specified gravel roads. How do you encourage non-residential commercial industrial uses through this area if we don't have improved roadway systems? So what staff is looking to the authority tonight to see is, should we be including in our Highway 61 South corridor analysis that incorporation of the highway business? And then if you have just general support for us moving forward with soliciting a matching grant for the work from the Washington County EDA. Any questions for me?
Questions for Abby?
So
Yeah.
what is the scope of that grant from Washington County? I don't know if
Sure.
I missed that.
Sure. Right now, it hasn't, this is kind of, for us, as we want to finish scoping out that project, really see what that cost deliverable is. It is a pre-development grant program, and Chris might be able to speak to a little bit more specifics, but there are matching funds or funding available for us so that we wouldn't incur all of the costs of that analysis.
Before we talk about some of the grant specifications, maybe this might be a little bit more of your question, and I have the same question, is what is it that needs to be done? So set aside how we're funding
Sure.
it. What does the project look like?
Sure. So right now, we really need to, there's a couple different factors. One is to figure out how we need to change our codes to encourage commercial development in this area, not necessarily prohibit residential, but deter the residential that we're seeing in mass. That's also going to take a comprehensive plan amendment, so that's going to be work that we would be doing in consultation with the Metropolitan Council. If we include the highway business area, that pink area up in the southwest corner, that would also probably be looking at some sort of potentially some engineering studies, some small area studies to see how will this feed into the existing transportation system, but also what does that highway business look like in terms of land use. It will be surrounded by residential on the north. Hugo will have residential on the south side of our border. What is that really, what are some of those uses really intended to be down there? As part of the comprehensive plan, we do have to do some rezoning of property to help encourage this development to occur in the future. And for us right now as staff, and maybe I can feign a little ignorance being still pretty new, is what is the hope for that area in the future? So that's what the study would be looking at. At this time, we don't have cost estimates. Really what I wanted to know is whether or not the EDA is in support of us exploring that highway business area as part of this corridor expansion project or corridor analysis project.
And who does that work? Is this staff work that is special project, or is this work that is contracted, or
This would
what?
be contracted work. Staff would lead the contractor or consulting firm, whoever we end up choosing. Bolton and Mink did our comp plan. They have helped with some of the preliminary analysis. So this commission or the EDA may remember that Headwaters 1, 2, 3 was re-guided and rezoned 2020, I believe. Bolton and Mink did some preliminary work at that time. So it could end up being them. It could be a different consulting firm. They would do the bulk of the work with staff taking the lead. Hence the additional, seeking additional resources to help us with that analysis.
Go ahead.
And this might be a question for Ryan, but there's just, anytime going forward, there's this, as far as interchange at 180th or whatever that would have been, 170th to south, that's just not, it's completely off the books now.
Well, remember, we just initiated it at the last comp plan, right? And it's just the process that you got to keep doing this and keep pushing, because City of Forest Lake are in favor for it. Lionel Lakes was neutral. Hugo's obviously against it because it would obviously take commercial property and push that to the north. Washington County obviously wasn't supportive of it at the time, but Anoka County played neutral. I'd say sits pretty good on an initial push on something that large. I still don't think what was in everyone's transportation plan will ever be built because of environmental reasons. So I do think there's going to have to be something pushed to the north. And whoever's more aggressive on that might be the one that gets that in their backyard. Otherwise, if something happens and develops, continues to lead, that advancement of construction, then it's going to obviously be farther south, because you can see all the development happen along 35 in the Hugo, Lionel Lakes area. they're the one that are gonna push the safety improvements that are gonna be needed sooner if we don't stay active on it.
And you, I mean, stay active, so you would suggest to staff or to council that we stay active on it? That's a huge plus for the,
Well, one of the biggest and things that you guys have going for you this year that you didn't have previously is your community development director. That is a critical person in that position who's gonna be able to guide some of those connections and have some consistency through this process.
One of, I'll find my question, I promise. One of the things that makes this so hard is the timeline of development and having things staged in the right way, and when we're taking action on what to prompt the next action. So I just want to make sure I understand part of what is driving the request today, or kind of the immediate plan. And is it that there is pressure on the 61 corridor today for housing? And is it just around the long-term concern of the balance between housing and commercial? And this would be more of a rezoning effort that would be more aggressive with commercial? Is that right?
That is correct. This
I'm-
mixed-use, future land use area is really a target for multifamily residential. I think the EDA has probably seen that in the Headwaters development in the recent past. We're fielding inquiries, 2 pretty solid inquiries right now, right near that intersection for more multifamily. It really comes down to the code. The code just really isn't encouraging of commercial development. And so it's kind of twofold. One is to promote that inclusion of commercial development, but also probably to do a little bit of analysis to determine whether or not we have enough multifamily in that mixed use category going forward.
Right.
Really, the whole intent of the project, though, is to see how we can incorporate more business development into this corridor.
I don't have the multifamily kind of requirement or the mixed-use requirements in front of me, but as I'm just kind of putting myself back into those conversations that were had at the time of the comp plan, I just remember the conversation distinctly being around us as council and as EDA. I think Planning Commission was part of that. As a city, we just wanted to be as flexible as possible. But I don't recall that being a conversation around like we would allow we didn't want to exclude residential, but certainly wasn't the push. My impression of that time was that, and I'm looking to those that were also here to confirm, my impression of that time was that we really wanted that to be a commercial corridor. And I think we landed on the mixed use because it provided perhaps the most flexibility. And now I'm hearing that may have guided us more towards multifamily and very much a residential use, that I just don't remember that was ever the intent. And so if we have in doing that, if we have opened ourselves up or kind of signaled to the market that we intend for that to be multifamily, and if this is a move to kind of correct that, I think we need to do it, because again, I don't think we intended this to be a residential corridor. I think we intended this to be, it kind of pulls all of the way through to the big pink in the southeast corridor, which was very commercial, and very much a commercial use. But I don't know if, others have thoughts, or I don't want to misconstrue kind of what the intent was at the time, but
I don't think at the time you could have anticipated the enormous amount of multifamily that's been building and the demand, and
right, okay.
I think it's just a matter of what is popular and what seems to be the market these days. I don't think you ever could have known that what's happening is happening. I think you do have to swing back and look at some more commercial and business development. That's the 61 corridor is the perfect place for that. That's where all the traffic is. That's what, commercial development looks for, car counts and things like that, so.
Because those would also be permitted uses under a mixed use, right? Is that right, that it's more of an
Yes.
umbrella type zoning?
It's definitely an umbrella type zoning. However, there is the caveat that everything starts at a 50% residential. And so even though it may not have been the intention of the city to, promote residential, we do have in there a requirement of 50% residential. So what we're really, but then also says you can have more than 50%.
Right.
And that's what
Right.
we're really seeing is that really strong desire for more from the development community, from more residential in this area. I think as a community, we would really like to see that mixed use, or if anything along that corridor, more commercial, just
Right.
because this is generally you want your commercial along your major highway corridors.
Right.
We've got our share of apartments, as far as I'm concerned.
Well, and there's certainly a lot of, there is a density question, and then there's also the location question, and, getting further south on 61, away from the headwaters, where we do have some transit options and some community resources, that, seems to make sense to have it where we currently have. I guess maybe what has changed is exactly what Abby said, is that the market is now pushing hard on multifamily, and it is allowed, and if it is allowed, that's where we're seeing the action. And so what I'm hearing is maybe a suggestion that we would consider something that is more specific, now that we, need to signal to the market, this is what our intent is for those spaces.
Do we have other places that we want those developers to look at then instead of the 61 corridor?
We do have other mixed-use areas. We do also have some other multifamily areas. Our multifamily areas are kind of getting built out. Really what we probably need to be doing more is more proactive development of our single-family residential, or that proactive development of more community commercial, more, business uses throughout the community, because I think the intent really is to help have a balance, a mix of uses throughout the community. There are some pockets, though, that are more well-suited for multifamily.
The two ones that you're talking about, the inquiries, are they right on 61, or are they off a little bit?
One is directly on 61, but wouldn't be accessed onto 61, and then the other one is right next to Bell Bank. So, very close to that 61 corridor. So I hear, at least at this authority, the EDA is supportive of us keeping moving forward with that Highway 61 analysis and moving forward with that. Would you like us to be also exploring that highway business area as well?
So,
Well, I guess if the want and desire is to hopefully have an interchange there, I think that's where we need to push. And I don't know if you would include that at this point. Leave it as is, as it's zoned now, or the comp plan says. And we don't even have, our pavement policy doesn't allow to pave roads or anything like that. So it's all dirt roads down there. So I don't know how far out. I mean, I know this is 2040, but that's going to come quickly. So I'm a little hesitant to do anything there unless is there some demand? Have we had any inquiries on any of that down there? No.
There's a couple factors here. We do have land that is for sale right along, visible from I-35. Because you do have that highway commercial that's bordering 35, people are seeing this as a development opportunity for commercial uses. Even though it is a 2040 plan and we have a staged plan, so by 2030 we'll have urban services here, by 2040 we'll have urban services here, and I don't have that map right now. The land is currently zoned for agricultural use. So if a business came in and said, you know what, I'm ready to pave that road and move that water and that sewer, we haven't set them up because the underlying zoning wouldn't allow for that business. So we have to do something with the zoning map, and this is the future land use map, because the future land use says it'll be highway business. It's just the question of, what does that highway business look like? Is that fast food? Is that, furniture outlets? I'm not sure, and that's the part of the dialogue that I'm curious about. Because we're looking at uses along that 61 corridor, does it make sense to say what would be kind of some of those uses in that highway business area too?
can somebody, does anyone remember the conversation on, and I'm trying to zoom in on the map that's on screen, and I don't have, it's not gonna work, because I'm not
Where
in
would you
control.
like to zoom in?
Yeah, thank you. So you asked a great question about what was intent, and it'd be interesting to go back to the notes of the meetings around how that landed on highway business and not industrial. Because I know that was part of the conversation, is what should that be? And I'm not recalling right now exactly how we landed on highway business, but I think that portion of the dialogue and that portion of the project plan would be helpful to kind of know what was the intent. Go ahead, Dan.
I think some of the reason why that landed as the way it did was some of the intent there was more like big box retail with some of that initial conversation of Costco's, Best Buy, sort of.
Right.
I think similar to what you see sort of on the south end, like in Burnsville, right around the 35 and 35E, where they come back together in the south end of the metro, sort of replicating that up here. I think that was part of that conversation, why it went highway business and not industrial.
And maybe this is something for the study to consider. With that dynamic, there is this interesting question around, is that successful without the interchange? And again, we're back to this chicken and egg of, if that's going to require an interchange, and if an interchange is likely or unlikely, what else might that be? And does that lean more industrial? And is there a use case for industrial, or fill in the blank? What is it? And I think, are those the types of
That's a
questions
great-
that you would
That's a
answer in
great
that
question. Yeah, I
in
think
that
that's really, I think staff still has work to put together a scope and what exactly is the study. Don't imagine that we would be doing it before 2023, but it's really trying to figure out, do we want to put this highway business? Are we really looking at the southwest quadrant and business,
Right.
commercial, industrial uses? What does that scope really look like? What does that cost? I think at least right now, what I'm hearing is that there's some desire to be asking some questions about that highway business and maybe some value in incorporating that into the 61 corridor study, and that you're supportive of us at least moving forward with developing a little bit more of a scope, refining projects, seeing what the cost is going to be, working with the county in terms of just what kind of cost share there might be out there. And then I'm certainly happy to bring that back to before you. I've got a lot going on. So this would take a little bit of time anyways, but I didn't want to get too far down this Highway 61 corridor, because I think we're ready to probably move on doing something there, and staff may be able to do quite a bit without outside assistance. But I wanted to at least see what kind of appetite there was for kind of looking at that whole southwest corridor as a kind of small area study in itself.
Yeah, so my initial reaction and my concern about having this pink section all along has been, I like the idea of it, and I voted for it, and I'm supportive of it. My concern is that it is not naturally I don't believe it's naturally where the market is going to go without some significant city action or transportation action like MnDOT over, interchange action to change that dynamic. My gut tells me without something happening at either a city or a MnDOT level, this is going to naturally want to fill in as residential. And so if we want to change that trajectory, we do need to do something. And so, yes, I hear what you're saying on there's, it's kind of back to the chicken and egg of how much do we spend on preparing for it. But in absence of us doing something, I think we're going to continue to see the pressure to be residential, probably single-family residential built in. And that could be a fine answer, but that's different than what's in the comp plan. So I think it is going to have to come from us if we're going to see something different than kind of what the market trend has been. And if this is the next step to moving that market trend, or at least kind of tackling this question, I'm open to it. I want to see more detail of specifically,
Yep.
how much are we investing in that, and what does that actual project plan look like?
Yep.
But I
That's,
do think it's something that, if we just sit and do nothing, I don't think MnDOT's gonna just come knock on our door and say, hey, we're ready to build that interchange now, and then the big box stores follow. I think it's gonna take action by us and others to make that happen.
Oh, I'll keep plugging away on a scope, refining that project, looking at some costs to bring you back some more specifics for the project. I know that because we're seeing that development pressure just in that mixed use, maybe it is better that we spend a little bit of time really quick now and look at that mixed use category, separate them out. But I'll keep the EDA informed. This has been a great dialogue just to kind of see, is there appetite to keep looking at these non-business developments on that south side of town? Because even though it is a 2040 plan, there's interest, landowners are interested in selling. And so this is usually the time that we end up with a, oops, we didn't want that, so.
Other thoughts on that? This is always challenging because the timelines are so long, but the action is like in the next couple of months.
I think an interchange is absolutely key to that whole piece of property there. I don't know, you know, because otherwise everything has to go back to 61.
Right.
That's gonna be a tough deal there, especially on 180th,
Right.
if you're gonna service both freeways there. So it'll be interesting what the study comes up with, you know.
Other thoughts on sequencing or scope?
No, I think I understood. I mean, you're just going to get more clarity and then
Yep.
come back to us.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
Sam, you made the comment about too many apartments. I mean, is there a ratio or some kind of a number that we're trying to hit I mean, to keep that in check?
There is. In our comp plan, we have said by decade how many of each type of product, so low single family, low density single family, low to medium, multifamily. In discussions right now with the Planning Commission, they're interested in seeing where we are with those numbers. Unfortunately, my predecessors didn't keep track of that the most consistently. So it's on my, project plan to kind of, or, office administration to try to get some of that data together so we really can see where are we in terms of what we said we would do in our comp plan.
I'm really glad to hear that, because I'd like to see that.
Yeah.
It just seems like we're,
I think a
Getting
lot of
close.
people would like to see, because we
Yeah.
have had a lot of multifamily development, and what does that really mean in terms of what our projected growth was gonna be, what we said we would end up doing?
Counts and then also the speed of growth. My concern is that we've had a escalation of growth in multifamily and we've seen things not take off to the same extent on single family. And so we might have things growing at different rates that might end us up in the future with a skewed ratio.
Hands down, our multifamily has grown exponentially compared to our single family in the last 10 years.
So, and then, back to your observation on where we are on 61, it is the type of fact pattern that makes us question whether we should do a comp plan amendment and kind of change direction or so.
Yes, and I've reached out to the Met Council. I know that there's some work was done with the Headwaters 1, 2, 3 project. It could be that there might be a simple, quick little fix with the comp plan, and it wouldn't take any consultant time. I should know that, certainly before your next meeting, but I don't anticipate that was the case, so.
And at this point, back to those other two, the interesting parties, what are they being told right now? Are we on hold just to figure out what we want to
No,
do here?
multifamily is a permitted residential use, so we have to work through that process.
Great.
well, right now, the other issue is sewer and water over there too, isn't it, Ryan? I mean, in that whole area?
We don't have water south of Headwaters Parkway.
Oh,
Sewer is only the Met Council line that runs on the east side of Fenway, parallel with Fenway, straight north and south. So they would still have to go quite the distance. And just knowing the area, the highest area in the city is at 190th and 61. So if we ran gravity from that sewer, from the Met Council sewer line, our sewer would be over 60 feet deep in that area. That's something we have specifically looked at. The good thing is we can serve all the way past Granada, or is that Granada, or whatever that road is, right? We can serve all that by gravity, all the way back to the Met Council line. No lift stations.
but it's still, either way, it's a big expense to get all that stuff in there.
Yeah, that's,
So,
I think off the
is
top
it
of my
done
head,
ahead
is
of time or
an
not?
18-inch pipe that would have to be extended to serve all that area per what's approved in the comp plan right now. So again, if the comp plan changes and we
Yeah.
don't need that capacity, we might have an 18-inch pipe in there for no reason.
That's why this study is really important, and I do support it for that reason. You know, just because of this piece of property's kind of out there by itself, you know,
Yep.
for many reasons.
Great.
So,
All right, thank you. I have enough direction.
Awesome. I think, Chris, you may have had some comment to.
Yeah, thank you, President Bain and members. Just a quick comment. I was very pleased when Dan and Abby reached out to me to ask about the pre-development finance fund as a partnership to the city's planning effort. And if you do decide to go down that road, do this plan, we would definitely love to see this application come in. And this would likely go to the CDA board for consideration and approval. But I can tell you personally that if you would have asked me when we started working on the comp plan, if we would have had 6 million square feet under construction in terms of industrial development today in Washington County, I would have said, no way.
Right.
But it's happening. Cottage Grove's industrial park is full. They're running out of land, and so naturally it's going to start coming north. And so the more planning you can do to prepare for that development is going to happen. The supply chain challenges are going to continue to get worse, in my opinion, before they get better. And that's stuff that was built overseas is starting to be built here in the U.S. right now, which is good. Manufacturing is strong right now, and industrial space is strong right now in this economy. And just to be prepared for that, if you do have the opportunity, it would be nice to plan for it and go through the process and find out if it makes sense or not. So just some thoughts. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you for those comments. All right, and Abby, you said you have enough
I
feedback?
do. Yes, I do.
Very
Thank
good.
you so much.
Yep. Thank you. All right, we're going to transition to updates before we move into a workshop session on TIF. Other city updates, Dan, Patrick? Anything else? All right, and Chris, Washington County update?
Thank you again, President Bain and members. I'm happy to say that we are going to participate again in the MinCar Expo. This is the event in downtown Minneapolis where we have over 500 developers, brokers, realtors, builders, businesses that are looking for opportunities. This is kind of the fall preseason kickoff for next spring. And Dan, we've got you registered. I think Abby, I may have you registered that night too, to go down and represent the city and the county at a booth. And we're going to be down there with Cottage Grove and Woodbury as well. And if any of the EDA members would like to attend, let me know and I can register you. It's a minor cost to participate in it, but it's a really good networking opportunity. And then also following that in December, we're going to do the East Metro portion of the Suburban Market Summit. And Dan has agreed to speak on a panel, or maybe Abby will as well, related to the tech corridor. And so we're going to have Bruce Saylor, somebody from Hugo, and then somebody from Forest Lake be on the panel to talk about the Headwaters 123, just to generate some interest in, and see if we can get some technology-related businesses to consider the Minnesota Tech Corridor. So pretty excited about some upcoming marketing events. One thing briefly is that, and I've mentioned it to Dan and Abby before, is we have a grant through the federal EPA. It's a $600,000 grant to do environmental assessments on either land or buildings. And so if you have sites in mind that you would like to do some environmental assessments on, and it's free, there's no matching, I should say, no matching cost to the city or to the private landowner if it's a volunteer landowner. The EPA grant will cover the 100% of the cost of the environmental review. So if you want to do a phase 1 or phase 2 or lead or asbestos testing in a building, we could do that through this EPA grant. And the timeline runs through 2024. So just to kind of keep that in mind, if you have potential sites that we could help do some analysis on, we'd love to be able to explore that with you.
Nature of that grant, is it environmental review of previously developed
Yes.
sites?
Yep,
So,
or
okay.
redevelopment opportunities, or even
opportunities.
city-owned sites. We just did 2 in the city of Newport. One was an old fire hall that is likely a candidate for redevelopment for some townhomes.
Mhm.
And then I got 3 applications this week from St. Paul Park to do some sites down there that are city-owned properties that they want to find out if there's any contamination that they need to deal with at some point in time. But if it's a redevelopment opportunity, those are really high-priority sites, but even other sites that you just want to explore to find out if there might be something there you just don't know, we can fund the study to be done.
And with partnership of a landowner, could it be a private property as well? Or is it only intended for?
Private property is eligible, but we would only do it on a volunteer basis. If the owner of the property says, yep, I'd like to participate, we'll absolutely do those.
Wondering if it's if it would be there's any sites downtown that we might target for that. And if it's not city-owned, I wonder if that's something that we might bring to a property owners who's expressed interest, if there's something that could be done.
Yep,
Take
already
advantage of
doing
that. Excellent.
Thank you.
My downtown comes immediately to mind, but certainly if there's other sites as well that we think would be good candidates, it'd be great to
Just a
take advantage
quick
of
reference
that.
for your background too, the city did do some of this work on Headwaters 123 to get it more shovel-ready.
Right.
Chris, when was that MinCar Expo? What's the date on that expo?
I'm sorry?
The what did you call it, MinCar Expo?
Yep, the MinCar Expo. It's the Minnesota Commercial Realtors Association. If you think about residential realtors use the MLS service, this is the commercial version of the MLS service, the kind of the go-to database for commercial realtors. And it's on October 22nd in Minneapolis. And I can send you the information and forward it to Dan and send it out to you if you're interested in attending.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And Leif, I think you have a chamber update?
Yeah, Nanette sent the following update. She wasn't able to be here tonight. We recently welcomed the new teachers and administrators of Forest Lake Area Schools and Lakes International Language Academy with our 44th annual Business Education Day with the sponsorship help of 25 chamber members. They've identified 10 businesses in Forest Lake and Columbus area that have recently opened or will open in the next few months. We're launching our fall membership meetings with a Meet the Candidate breakfast at the end of the month. And then we're researching the feasibility of relaunching the Lake Area Expo as an outdoor event in the spring of 2023.
Excellent. Thank you. All right. Next item on the agenda, we have a kind of a workshop session related to TIF. And Dan, I think you're going to walk us through this.
Yep, President, members of the EDA. A TIF discussion has been on the EDA's work plan for probably 2 years now. If you recall back in, I think it's early '21, we started having conversations on business incentives and kind of going through all of our incentive, the tools that we would have for the redevelopment and kind of going through the policies behind them, when you would use them, how they work, the mechanics of them. And a lot of that work really kind of got put on the back burner as we went through the downtown planning process. So to kind of dust that off and kind of re-engage on the TIF side of the equation, tonight what we have here is a video that was put out by the Office of the State Auditor. The Office of the State Auditor has a lot of TIF training videos on their website, but this one's specifically geared towards councils and other TIF authorities, so it's really a primer video to kind of go through what TIF is, some of the considerations that policy boards have when considering the use of TIF, how it works. There was a request at the beginning of this process that we started going through the policy. The EDA did request some more education on how TIF works. This is in response to that request. And again, this is kind of here to set the foundation for discussion. As we start working through the TIF policy, this provides some background for the EDA, just sort of on the mechanics and how TIF works. So there's a lot of information in here, but the OSA does a really good job of sort of laying out the TIF 101 on it. So without further ado, I will turn it over to the Office of State Auditor video.
The Minnesota Office of the State Auditor presents Tax Increment Financing, a primer for city councils and other TIF authorities. It provides a brief overview of key concepts and considerations for those considering whether to approve the use of TIF. Tax Increment Financing, or TIF, is a financing tool where the new value from a development is captured from the tax base so that the property taxes on the new captured value, i.e. the tax increments, can instead pay qualifying costs that enable the development to occur. We say that TIF is a financing tool, but it is important to also regard TIF as a set of laws with ongoing requirements, parameters, and limitations. It's not just a financing or accounting mechanism. A TIF authority should be well versed in the laws authorizing and governing TIF. Various development acts authorize projects and the use of TIF. The most common TIF authorities are cities and city entities, such as port authorities, economic development authorities, or housing and redevelopment authorities. County and multi-county HRAs, rural development authorities, and one large metro township can also be TIF authorities. The TIF Act does not authorize projects and the use of TIF. It regulates how TIF works and how it can and cannot be used. Logistically, development acts govern project areas in which broader development activities occur, beyond just the TIF-supported developments. Sometimes they are coterminous with city boundaries. TIF is used more narrowly by creating TIF districts that consist of the parcels on which the financed development will occur. There can be many TIF districts within a single project area. Getting back to TIF as a financing tool, because development costs are generally incurred up front, while tax increments are collected over the duration of the district, debt obligations are needed and become an important consideration. The most common type of debt obligation, representing 66% of TIF debt reported for 2020, is a pay-as-you-go or pay-go note, where the authority has an agreement to reimburse a developer, owner, or note holder for qualifying costs that the developer or owner incurred or separately financed. They've become popular because the risk is not borne by the TIF authority if increments fall short of projections and become insufficient to pay all the costs. General obligation, or GO bonds, are less commonly used compared to the early years of tax increment financing. With these bonds, the municipality pledges their full faith and credit and must raise taxes to pay the bonds if tax increments are not sufficient. Revenue bonds pledge only tax increment revenues and other revenues such as special assessments, and are fairly uncommon because they are less attractive to investors who bear more risk. Many districts make use of interfund loans, where internal dollars are borrowed from another fund of the municipality, usually to cover supplemental costs like administrative costs, rather than as a sole funding source. Next, let's understand how TIF captures value and generates tax increments. When a TIF district is created, the authority must request the county auditor certify the original value of the district for the base year. Any new value in subsequent years, measured as the current minus the original value, will be identified as captured value. For example, here we see the market values on the left and the equivalent net tax capacities on the right. The TIF district was comprised of a parcel with a base year market value of $200,000 or $3,250 of net tax capacity, net tax capacities being the value used for property tax calculations. After development, the current market value is now $3.4 million, or $67,250 of net tax capacity. $3.2 million would be the captured market value, and there is $64,000 of captured net tax capacity. Captured value is not part of the tax base, meaning it is not used to calculate the tax rate or generate local tax levies. Only the original value is part of the tax base. The tax rate is still applied to the captured value, however, and that yields the tax increments that finance the development costs. The implications on the tax base, rates, and levies should be well understood. Capturing value from the tax base directly affects rate calculations. Tax rates are determined by dividing a jurisdiction's adopted property tax levy by the value of its tax base, which excludes the TIF district's captured value. For example, let's assume the city has a total net tax capacity of $1,064,000 and the TIF district has captured $64,000 of net tax capacity. That leaves a total city tax base of $1 million. The city has a total levy of $467,700 of property taxes. The city tax rate would be 46.770% when calculated using the tax base that excludes the captured value. If the TIF district were terminated or not needed, and the $64,000 of captured value became available to support the same levy, the tax rate would be 43.957%. Understand that tax increments are additional taxes. Applying the tax rate to the uncaptured tax base raises the full levy amount. Applying it to the captured value generates additional taxes of nearly $30,000 that are being assessed above the levy amount adopted by the city. The capture of tax base might indirectly impact judgments about how to levy given sensitivity to higher tax rates. In this example, if the TIF district terminated or decertified, the city could raise the levy to maintain the same tax rate, keep the levy the same and let taxpayers enjoy eased tax burdens, or something in between. You can see how creating new tax base has very positive implications if it would not have existed without TIF, while capturing tax base that would have existed anyway without TIF has the opposite implications of raising tax rates, taxes, and the pressure on levy decisions. This is why an important component of TIF is focused on qualified costs that enable the development to occur. A model of the Tif concept helps illustrate. The general premise from its redevelopment origins is that a property might be blighted, where its value is declining or stagnating, and this is expected to continue absent any public intervention or assistance. When a TIF district is created, the original value at that point in time is established, or frozen, as the tax base for the duration of the district. With public financing of TIF in place, development is enabled and the value increases as a result. Again, the tax rate is still applied to the captured value, but those taxes are segregated as tax increments and are not part of the tax levy. When the TIF district ends, taxpayers then realize the public benefits of the endeavor, as the new tax base is available to support local levies. The captured value that provided the tax increments is generally viewed neutrally as the investment that made the benefits possible, rather than negatively as economic loss, given that the development would not have occurred but for the use of TIF. This but-for test is crucial to the proper use of TIF. The statute requires that the municipality must be able to make a finding that, in its opinion, the proposed development would not reasonably be expected to occur solely through private investment within the reasonably foreseeable future, and that the increased market value of the site that could reasonably be expected without the use of TIF would be less than the market value of the proposed development after subtracting the present value of projected increments. In other words, the additional value created by the use of TIF must exceed the value of the investment of increment. But why is the but-for finding so important? In our conceptual model, we started with the premise that the value was declining or stagnating and that this was expected to continue for the foreseeable future absent assistance. If instead proposed development would occur without the use of TIF, the conceptual justification disappears. And when the TIF district is created, the freezing of the tax base for the duration of the district and the capturing of value to generate tax increment represents an economic loss, where tax base that could have supported local levies is instead providing a subsidy to the development. This illustration highlights a worst-case scenario, where the proposed development would happen without TIF. Of course, it may not be so easy to assess what would or would not happen without TIF. The but-for finding, after all, involves some subjectivity. It is unlikely to be so black and white that either no development would occur without TIF or that the proposed development would surely occur without TIF. Judgments must be made about what would reasonably occur absent the use of TIF over a time horizon of up to 26 years. Perhaps only some modest or undesirable development could be expected to occur late in the time horizon, or perhaps a nearly comparable development would likely follow quite soon. In between lies increasingly nebulous possibilities. Perhaps a more common possibility is where, absent the use of TIF, a different development of lesser value would occur later during the TIF district's time frame. In such a scenario, the start of the TIF district effectively leads to higher value development, and the capture of value and increment is neutral, until the point at which the value that would have existed without TIF begins to represent an offsetting economic loss because it would have been available without the use of TIF. In the end, there is public benefit, but it is offset to some degree by the intervening economic loss. These models do not account for the immediate benefits of jobs and economic activity, but they help illustrate the effects taxpayers may experience and the importance of making a studious assessment of the but-for finding. Note that while TIF authorities hold decision-making power over the use of TIF, those decisions impact all of the local taxing jurisdictions. The county, city, school district, and special taxing districts all see their tax base locked into the original value and do not benefit from the new value for the duration of the TIF district. One step in the process of approving a TIF district is to give copies of the proposed TIF plan to the county and the school district, and in some instances to invite the input of county commissioners. Other than an infrequently used option where counties may require certain county road costs be included in the TIF plan, a TIF authority is not bound by any input provided, but giving such input its due consideration is a dutiful part of approving a TIF district. Beyond considering whether or not a proposed district is appropriate to approve, there are additional considerations regarding right-sizing the use of TIF or using it to the proper extent. In our prior example, a TIF district capturing $64,000 of net tax capacity raised $29,933 of tax increment from just the city rate of 46.770%. If the total tax rate of all jurisdictions were 136.866%, the TIF district will collect $87,594 annually. For a redevelopment district, which can collect increment for up to 26 years, This could generate close to $2.3 million over the life of the district. But what if only $1 million of assistance is needed to make the development possible? This raises the important consideration of examining the Tif Plan Estimates that set the total authorized cost for a TIF district. As a quick overview, a TIF plan must include estimates of bonded indebtedness, original net tax capacity, captured net tax capacity, and its duration. More importantly, the TIF plan must contain separate estimates of the cost of the project for things like acquisition and site improvement costs, and including administrative costs, interest as a financing cost, and the tax increment to be generated over the life of the district. These three estimates establish the total authorized costs or budget of a TIF district. The total project costs and financing costs to be paid with tax increments cannot exceed the total estimate of tax increment. Setting appropriate TIF plan estimates that act as the authorized costs to be paid from tax increments is an important consideration. Some might advise maximizing estimated costs to enable the maximum expenditure of increments as a revenue source. This might be done by pooling increments or spending increments outside the district on other costs in the project area. Or is it better to minimize those expenditures to what is necessary to terminate the district as early as possible and reap the tax-based benefits? An authority might also consider setting an earlier duration limit than what is allowed by statute. 26 years, for example, may be far too long to tie up tax base if necessary costs could be financed in 10, 12, or 15 years. There is also an opportunity to share captured value or just to monitor things and decertify early. To further explain, an authority has a seldom used option to share rather than fully capture the new tax base. In this scenario, if from our earlier example, $20,000 of the captured $64,000 of net tax capacity were instead shared, the frozen tax base is essentially raised to include some of the new tax capacity and represent some immediate public benefit that will be enjoyed for the duration of the district. The risk here is whether the diminished tax increments on the remaining captured value will be sufficient should the growth in value end up being less than projected due to the actual scale of development, market conditions, or legislative changes that impact property taxes. This is why most authorities choose not to share value, and a more attractive option may be to decertify the district early once the captured increment has been sufficient to cover the necessary costs. This is consistent with the 5 and 6 year rules direction to identify core in-district costs in the first 5 years and then to decertify once sufficient increment is available to pay those costs. The idea is to limit increment capture to what is needed to achieve early decertification and enjoy the benefits of the expanded tax base as early as possible. Early decertification is actually very common. Based on decertifications that occurred from 2016 to 2020, 70% of redevelopment districts decertified early, as did 78% of housing districts. And not just early by a year or two, but on average by 10 years. Even economic development districts, with their shorter durations, decertified early 37% of the time. Sometimes we encounter municipalities delaying decertification and holding on to surplus increment revenues, or wanting to keep the stream open for more expenditures. However, as we've seen, decertifying early maximizes tax-based benefits, and when unused increments are returned to the county auditor, they are distributed back to the county, city, and school district in proportion to their tax rates. The redistributions are free of tax increment restrictions and can be used for municipal priorities. There is sometimes a false notion expressed that returning increment is giving it back to the state, which is not the case. And it is wise to think broadly and consider the impact on all taxing jurisdictions, not just the municipality. Beyond the broad conceptual considerations, there are additional approval considerations. We do not cover them in detail here, but the following procedural requirements should be understood. First, make sure the TIF plan contains its required elements. In addition to the required estimates already noted, there are various statements, lists, identifications, and descriptions that are required, as well as possible elections, such as delaying first receipt of increment, that must appear in the TIF plan if used. Second, in addition to the but-for finding, a municipality must make other findings, including district type and purpose findings, a finding of conformity with municipal plans, a finding related to affording maximum opportunity for private development, and if located in a fiscal disparities region, an election of the computation method that resolves how capture of tax increment will work relative to the making of fiscal disparity contributions associated with the new value. And third, make sure to follow the published notice, county notice, and public hearing procedural requirements prior to approving the TIF district. Moreover, there are many legal considerations involved in the use of TIF that can affect not only TIF plans in the creation of a district, but also the ongoing actions and operations of the TIF district over its full duration. The list here captures some of the broad areas of provisions and restrictions. Provisions may require actions like returning increment, decertifying a district early, providing notifications, addressing errors, annual reporting, and remedying violations. Getting legal or professional advice is a good idea when using TIF, as are regular reviews to ensure that activities remain in compliance with the TIF Act. Therefore, approving a TIF district is not just closing a deal on a proposed project. It's also making a long-term commitment to segregate and track funds, monitor legal compliance, maintain and retain documentation, and complete reporting obligations. Municipalities should honestly assess their own administrative capacities and take care to establish clear duties and processes to avoid consequences that may follow from poor record keeping and improper activities. This concludes our primer. To learn more about TIF, please refer to additional videos and resources on our website or contact us with any questions you may have. Thanks for watching.
Was everybody an expert now on TIF?
For sure.
I think the intent of that video was basically to show how complex these things can get. And, you know, when looking back at how we've used TIF, I think the need for a policy here to sort of help guide some of these processes is very apparent. We've typically, going back through, historically, we've typically used pay-as-you-go TIF financing. And we also have lined up for most of ours do decertify early, so we do follow those trend lines that we see in there. But just kind of looking through how we administered some of these in the past, I think we need to have a little bit clearer pathway, how they go through the system, how they process, what we're trying to incentivize, you know, what type of, you know, when we would use that, when we wouldn't use it. You know, so I think there's a lot of conversation sort of surrounding the entire use of TIF, and, you know, kind of seeing just this primer video here shows the complexity of what happens when you implement a TIF district. It's not just a couple of forms you fill out. There's a lot of ongoing commitment from the city side to make sure that we're maintaining that, and there is impact to levy dollars as well. You know, authorizing TIF districts, it's not budget neutral. So just a lot of information there, and a lot of information will be forthcoming as well as we sort of walk down this path for policy development for TIF districts within the city.
So when you say budget neutral, is that based on just administrative costs to the city, or are there other costs? If it's set at a certain level, how is it not budget neutral, then how does that change?
I think you see it, when you look at like the total, like you're freezing the capacity. So on what you have an increase of $2 million in capacity, but the city doesn't realize that right away. It has to wait, 10 years for that to come back online. So for those 10 years, even though you've increased capacity, you're not seeing that benefit in the general fund in terms of what the tax rate is. Versus if you didn't have the TIF district, you would see that additional revenues generated. I can go back through, there's that slide where it kind of shows what those differences are.
So is that different than like a blighted area? I mean, when really, who's to say that value is gonna go up, really, tax?
No, a lot of it, as the presentation said, you have to be real sure when you make out the TIF plan and make sure the numbers work. If it's blighted, it should work, but you're right. No matter what TIF you use, it's never a guarantee that's going to meet whatever the projection is as far as the growth in the property value. I mean, if you have a TIF plan that, let's just say, goes from $1 million to $20 million, and it only gets to $15 million of value, you're going to have some kind of a shortage on your TIF plan. That's why in the presentation there, it is important to try to have a pretty conservative plan that goes out 26 years, because most of the time your numbers usually work out very well if you have the right calculations and the right development so that you can pay it off early. But as Dan said, and as the presentation said, budget neutral, it really means unless you're going and borrowing money for some reason. it's not going to hit your general fund levy for whatever the period of time. You're not going to be able to take advantage of the growth in that, of the value of the property for, at the most, the 26 years. And that's also going to be the same with the school districts in the county. And that's why that's why they try to say if we can pay it off early, then that's when you start to gain the advantage or gain the increment. And sometimes also cities try to capture that extra once it falls off to, like he said, raise the tax levy so you capture what's been pulled off into the Tif district as well. So it really won't affect the general fund budget, or hopefully not a debt service budget, because it will be pay as you go, and it'll all depend on what the increment is.
And so on both Lighthouse Loss and Cherrywood, I don't know what it's called, they're ready to, I mean, they're ahead of schedule, correct? Are those the last two ones we've done?
Yeah, I think they're performing well. I think, I'm not sure about Cherry, I haven't looked at that in a while, but definitely Lighthouse Lofts is a little bit ahead of schedule. And we have our financial advisor, and it's required by the state every year to do a TIF reporting, and shows us a report of how it's acting and where it's scheduled to be and how its performance is, and if we can pay them off early, because we want to pay them off as early as anybody else, so that the city can take advantage of schools and the county can take advantage of the increased value.
Other questions?
Question, Chris, for you, is the recent TIFs that proposals that come to the county, have most been approved, over the last couple of years? Or you've seen some that aren't approved? Not really, and I guess, do we have to have sign off by both the school district and the county typically to have something like that?
You have to, when you put a TIF together, you have to inform the county and the school districts that you are going to propose this TIF district. And that's good PR, that's good public relations, but they really can't stop the TIF district from being formed. So if you're going to make one, you make one. But the schools, often it's the schools that have more of the objection because of the way they hurt a little bit. County, not so much, because they've got tons of money they can spend. But the schools are usually the ones, and traditionally, that object or have some concerns because of the small rate of growth in school levies and so forth. But no, it's all up to the city or the EDA, or whoever does the TIF district, to decide whether they're going to hop forward or not.
This isn't, I don't really have a question here, just an observation as so historically, we've done TIF districts based on discrete projects, and I know we've had some conversation around maybe needing to broaden that in the future. There's not really a question here, but just an observation of, it seems that if you're going to do that district, and if we were to consider a district, it's really I would think it's very challenging to have those projections needed for the but-for test, because if you're going to do it for a whole district, how would you know what those future plans would be if there's multiple sites within a TIF district, or are maybe I am getting to a question, are the mechanics that it is project by project evaluation, even though you've got a broader district that each project fits within? I guess I do have a mechanics question there.
Let's take
Does that make any sense?
Let's take the downtown, for example.
Yes.
You can say, okay, that's going to be one large TIF district. To answer your question, yes, it would be very difficult to determine what projects and what expenses are going to be there, because you don't know what's going to happen with them. I mean, obviously, you may have one development that you know is going to happen, and you have public infrastructure you can probably, that's related to some of that development, you can estimate, but the rest of downtown at this point in time, we really don't know if that's the case. So do you then risk doing the whole district and not meeting some of those projections? Yeah, it's much harder when you have a large TIF district if you don't have a solid plan and a solid development partner. If we had a developer walk in and said, we're buying all of downtown to redevelop, we're going to tear everything down, start over.
Different story, right, yeah.
It's right, it's pretty easy. We can make those assumptions, we can make those costs, but we don't have that because we have a lot of individual landowners, a lot of individual buildings, and a lot of individual plans and redevelopment that would have to happen. So it'd be very difficult, actually, to make the whole downtown a plan.
Okay. So in maybe a more practical application of this would be a significant project with some public infrastructure bundled together in a
Yeah,
single
I mean,
district,
let's
but-
just, yeah, if you have one development that you're going to build and it has public infrastructure and it has parks and it has trails and it has streets, that's when you take all of that in and make that a project plan.
Understood, okay.
So, Dan, you made the comment that we need to make some changes here. We've got a pretty good history so far of it. What changes and what's the time frame so that if we do have someone come to us fairly soon, what does that look like?
I think just looking at how these have been administered in the past, one of the things I noticed in how we've done, there's upfront costs with TIF districts when you set them up. You have to go do the but-for analysis, you have to hire the consultants on board. Historically, the city has borne those costs. We've billed them back, but we're taking that risk that the development agreement's gonna get signed. So I think just some of those small shifts like that to sort of say, let's get clear pathways here, so when you come in, what are the fees associated, what are the costs associated, who's paying those costs? Just some of that type of cleanup work, 'cause when I go back through these agreements now, kind of